Hello, and welcome to Restful Historian. Our focus this evening rests on the story of what medieval junk food was really like. Before we begin, if you find value in these stories, perhaps take a quiet moment to like the video and subscribe. It helps others find the channel. You can also let me know in the comments where you're listening from and the time. It's always fascinating to see our quiet community grow around the world. Now, find a comfortable position. Perhaps dim the lights or turn on a soft fan for background noise, and let's ease into tonight's story together. So, let us drift back together, shall we? Further and further, until the hum of your refrigerator fades and the glow of your screen is replaced by the flicker of a distant torch. We find ourselves in a world lit by sun and fire, a world where the very air smells different, a mix of wood smoke, damp earth, and the distant, slightly sweet scent of baking bread. Or perhaps something less appealing from the tanner's yard downwind. The concept of a supermarket, with its gleaming aisles and endless choice, is a dream not yet dreamt. Here, a quick bite is a far simpler and often rougher affair. Imagine wandering through a bustling medieval town, the cobbled stones uneven beneath your thin-soled shoes. The air isn't just filled with smells, but with sounds. The clatter of wooden cartwheels, the calls of street vendors, the distant clang of a blacksmith's hammer. You're hungry, looking for something to tide you over. Forget neatly packaged snacks. Your options are likely to be a hunk of coarse, dark bread, perhaps with a smear of salty butter if you're fortunate, or maybe a small piping hot meat pie. Its crust, a little greasy, the filling a mystery but undeniably savory, purchased from a stall where the cook wipes their hands on a stained apron. These weren't junk foods, born of industrial processing, but of necessity and opportunity. Think of a pasty, its thick, crimped edge, designed to be held by a miner's grimy hands, the edible part kept clean within, or perhaps some roasted nuts, sold by the handful, still warm from the brazier. Even a piece of fruit, if the season was right and you had a coin to spare, would feel like a small luxury. These were foods of the moment, simple and direct, fueling the day without fanfare. A far cry from the carefully curated choices we ponder today. These were indeed foods of fleeting moments, snatched amidst a life painted in very different hues from our own. Picture, if you will, a world where the sharp, unwavering glare of electric light simply didn't exist. Your days were governed by the sun's arc across the sky, a slow, deliberate journey. Mornings began with the gradual lightening of the east. The air often cool and carrying the scent of damp earth or wood smoke from rekindled fires. The quality of light itself was softer, more diffuse perhaps, filtered through imperfectly glazed windows or simply pouring in through an open doorway, illuminating swirling dust motes like tiny, transient stars. As evening approached, the world didn't just dim, it transformed. Shadows would stretch and deepen, consuming the sharp edges of the day. The encroaching darkness brought with it a different set of sounds. The crackle of the hearth, the distant bark of a dog, the murmur of voices huddled close for warmth and company. Firelight, whether from a flickering tallow candle, a resinous torch sputtering in a sconce, or the glowing embers of a central fire, cast an intimate dancing glow. It painted faces in shades of orange and red, made familiar spaces seem mysterious, and kept the vast inky blackness of the unlit world at bay, just for a while. Life pulsed to this rhythm, the turning of seasons not just a change in weather, but a fundamental shift in the texture of daily existence, a profound cycle of toil and scarce precious rest. That profound cycle of toil and scarce precious rest was deeply intertwined with what filled your belly, or, more often, what didn't. For most, food was a stark daily reminder of their lot, a monotonous rhythm of bread, often dark and coarse as bark, perhaps some pottage, that ever-present simmering stew of grains, and whatever vegetables could be coaxed from the stubborn earth or foraged from the hedgerows. The air in a humble dwelling would carry the constant faint aroma of wood smoke from the hearth, mingling with the earthy smell of damp thatch and the slightly sour scent of brewing ale, if you were fortunate enough to have it. Yet, even in this world of general scarcity, there was ingenuity. Every scrap was valued. Every season's offering carefully preserved through smoking, salting, or drying, stretching meager resources through the lean winter months. But as villages swelled into towns and towns into bustling, sometimes overwhelmingly fragrant cities, the story of food began to subtly shift. The air in these crowded lanes, already thick with the scent of humanity, industry, and frankly, often poor sanitation, began to carry new, more enticing notes. Here, amidst the clamor of merchants hawking their wares and the hurried footsteps on uneven cobblestones, you might encounter the waft of hot pies from a street-side oven. Their pastry, perhaps a little greasy from rendered fat, might encase a filling that was a comforting, if occasionally unidentifiable, savory mystery. Or perhaps the sharp, smoky scent of meat, of dubious origin but undeniable aroma, sizzling over a makeshift brazier, sold by a vendor whose cheerful cries were as much a part of the offering as the food itself. This wasn't feasting, not the grand affairs of lords, but it was a taste of something different, something quick, a small, edible punctuation mark in a long, laborious day. These quick bites, snatched from a bustling stall or a smoky cart, were the closest thing to fast food the medieval world really offered. Forget brightly lit signs and standardized menus. This was a much more organic affair, shall we say. There were no gleaming refrigerators, of course, no vast, chilled warehouses keeping ingredients pristine for days on end. So the freshness of your street-side snack was often a gamble, a silent prayer offered with every copper coin exchanged with a vendor whose apron might tell 1,000 greasy tales. Imagine for a moment approaching one of these impromptu kitchens. The air might be thick with the scent of old cooking oil mingling with wood smoke, and perhaps the faintest, slightly sweet tang of food that was just beginning to turn. The ingredients, often the cheaper cuts, the bits and pieces that wouldn't grace a noble's table, were simply what was available, what could be cooked quickly before the day's heat or the evening's chill took their inevitable toll. A meat pie, its crust perhaps a little tough but promisingly flaky, bought on a whim might have a filling that was a true adventure in texture and taste. Was that truly pork, or something a little less conventional? The strong, fragrant spices, so popular then, weren't just for adding exotic flavor. They were often a necessary aromatic mask for meat that was, let's gently put it, teetering on the edge of respectability. This wasn't about indulgence in the way we might think of junk food now, that deliberate, slightly guilty pleasure. It was often about sheer necessity, about grabbing a moment of warmth and a reasonably full belly in a world where both could be fleeting luxuries. The thick, sometimes gloopy stews ladled from bubbling pots, the pasties with their often questionable but filling interiors, they were, above all, fuel. Fuel to get through another long, arduous day of labor, or perhaps to sustain a traveler on a dusty, uncertain road. Not exactly a gourmet delight, but a vital, if occasionally risky thread in the rich, pungent tapestry of medieval city life. And that city life, oh, it pulsed with a raw, untamed energy, especially in the marketplace, the very stomach of the medieval town. Imagine, just for a moment, that you are there, threading your way through the throng. The ground beneath your worn shoes is a jumble of packed earth and uneven stones, perhaps slick in places with refuse you'd rather not contemplate too closely. The air itself is a thick tapestry woven from 1,000 threads. The acrid tang of wood smoke from countless hearths and workshops, the earthy sweetness of baking bread mingling with the sharp scent of spilled ale, and if the wind shifts, the unmistakable aroma of the tannery or the fishmonger's stall. It's a lot to take in, a sensory assault that modern life rarely replicates. Above the general hum of the crowd, a murmur of bartering, gossip, and perhaps a lute playing softly in a corner, rise the distinct, often piercing cries of the street vendors. "Pies, hot pies," one might call, their voice a familiar raspy beacon in the throng, gesturing towards a tray of steaming, if slightly suspect, pastries, their crusts an alluring golden brown. "Good ale, strong ale," another would roar, competing with the clatter of wooden cartwheels over cobbles and the occasional disgruntled squawk of a chicken destined for someone's pot. These weren't just advertisements. They were the insistent soundtrack of daily survival, a constant reminder of the immediate, pressing need for sustenance in a physically demanding age. For the medieval townsfolk, whose days were often filled with hard labor from dawn till dusk, These easily accessible foods were less a guilty pleasure and more a practical necessity. That quick, hot bite, perhaps a meat-filled pasty whose exact contents were best left unexamined, or a hunk of coarse bread dipped into a communal pot of peas pudding, provided the immediate energy to keep going. It was sustenance snatched on the move, a brief, warming respite in a world that rarely offered much comfort, a world where a full belly, however achieved, was a small, precious victory in itself. Indeed, for many souls packed into the bustling, often cramped medieval towns and cities, this convenience wasn't just welcome, it was utterly essential. Imagine, for a moment, your own small corner in such a place. Perhaps it's a single, smoky room, shared with several others, the air thick, with the scent of unwashed bodies and damp wool. There's no hearth of your own, no private space to chop vegetables or tend a simmering pot. Cooking at home, as we understand it, simply wasn't an option for a significant portion of the urban population. And so, the streets themselves became the communal kitchen. Picture the scene, if you will. A lively, sometimes overwhelming cacophony of sounds. The rumble of wooden cartwheels over uneven cobblestones, the insistent cries of vendors hawking their wares, and threaded through it all, the tantalizing, if sometimes deeply suspicious, aromas of food being prepared in the open air. Hot pies, their pastry crusts, often a rather alarming shade of brown from makeshift ovens, might be filled with spiced pigeon, eel, or perhaps something a little less identifiable. Best not to dwell on the exact ingredients too deeply. There were bubbling vats of peas pottage, thick and steaming, or perhaps skewers of indeterminate meat, glistening with rendered fat as they sizzled over smoky, makeshift braziers. You might find wafer-thin, crisp breads sold by wandering sellers, their calls echoing down narrow alleyways, or sweet custards and fruit tarts for those with a precious coin or two to spare. These were the fast foods of their day, born directly from necessity rather than fleeting desire. The hygiene standards? Well, let's just gently suggest that a robust constitution was a valuable asset. Yet, for countless people navigating the daily grind, these street-side offerings were the crucial difference between a long, hungry day and a somewhat satisfied one. A small, warm comfort in a life that was often anything but. Indeed, the concept of a meticulously balanced diet, of counting vitamins or worrying about saturated fats, would have been utterly alien to the medieval palate and mind. Their world wasn't one of carefully curated meal plans, scrutinized for nutritional density as we might understand it today. Instead, it was a landscape of immediate needs, where the persistent pang of hunger dictated the next bite, and any available sustenance was often a small, hard-won victory against the emptiness. Imagine the sheer, uncomplicated relief, then, of finding something, anything, that promised a quick surge of energy, or a moment of warm, greasy satisfaction. Perhaps it was a thick, sugary fruit paste, intensely sweet and sticky, clinging to the fingers, a crude but effective burst of raw fuel for a toilsome day. Or maybe a piping hot, if slightly dubious, meat pie purchased from a smoky stall, its crust perhaps a little too dark, its filling a savory, steaming mystery, yet undeniably hot and filling, chasing away the insistent chill of a damp morning. These weren't choices made from a colorful food pyramid printed on a government leaflet. No, these were pragmatic decisions, etched by scarcity and the daily grind. The primary goal was simply to silence the grumbling stomach, to fuel the body for another few hours of demanding labor, whether in the windswept fields or amidst the clamor of a crowded market stall. Comfort, too, played its subtle, vital role. In a life often stark and unforgiving, the simple, unadulterated pleasure of something sweet, or savory and warm clutched in the hand, could be a fleeting but potent balm for the spirit. It wasn't about long-term health strategies, but about making it through this day, this moment, with a little less emptiness and a little more fortitude. So, with that grumbling stomach quieted, at least for now, let's drift a little further into the bustling lanes of a medieval town, seeking out those quick, convenient morsels, the ancestors of our own fast food. Imagine, if you will, the air thick with a medley of smells, wood smoke from countless hearths, the faint dampness of wool and earth, perhaps the distant tang of the river, and, cutting through it all, the often tempting, sometimes dubious, aroma of hot food from a nearby stall. It wasn't a brightly lit, sterile takeaway. Far from it. This was food born of necessity, served with little fanfare, but often with a hearty dose of hope. You might find yourself drawn towards a pieman, his wares stacked on a wooden board, perhaps covered with a slightly grimy cloth. These weren't delicate, gourmet creations. Think instead of sturdy, handheld pastries, their crusts often a rather utilitarian affair, sometimes more of a disposable container, a coffin, they'd sometimes call it, than a culinary delight in itself. Inside? Well, that was always part of the quiet gamble. Perhaps it was a genuinely savory mix of beef and herbs, hot and steaming, the fat glistening on the rough, uneven pastry. Or maybe it was something a little more mysterious, the meat finely minced, heavily spiced, leaving you to ponder just for a moment its true origins before hunger won out. Clutching one of these hot pies, the warmth seeping into your chilled fingers on a damp day would have been a small, significant comfort. The crust might be tough, the filling a bit gloopy or surprisingly stringy, but it was hot, it was substantial, and it was quick. Alongside these, perhaps you'd find vendors labeling out peas pudding, or offering simple, coarse bread with a sliver of hard, salty cheese. On a colder day, the sweet, boozy fragrance of hot, spiced wine or ale from a steaming cauldron could offer a fleeting, warming escape. Each bite, each sip, was a small act of fueling up, a brief, earthy pause in the relentless, often harsh, rhythm of medieval life. So these quick, often greasy handfuls of sustenance, found on the bustling medieval street, were the fast food of their day. But when we hear junk food now, our minds conjure images of fluorescent cheese dust, impossibly uniform fries, or sugary drinks fizzing with artificiality. Medieval fast food, however, wasn't quite the same beast. It wasn't born from complex chemical processes in a distant factory, but from the very real, very immediate need for a warm meal in a world where many, especially in growing towns and cities, didn't have a kitchen of their own, or perhaps even a reliable hearth. Imagine yourself a laborer or a traveler, far from any personal larder. Your stomach rumbles, a hollow ache against the backdrop of city clamor, the clang of a blacksmith's hammer, the distant cry of a merchant, the street vendor's stall, with its wafting smells of baking dough or stewing meat, however dubious its origin, was a beacon. This wasn't junk because it was hyper-processed with unpronounceable ingredients. Rather, its junk quality might have come from less than fresh components, questionable hygiene by our standards, or the simple heavy fare designed to fill rather than truly nourish with finesse. The pies might have meat of uncertain provenance, the ale could be thin and watery one day, surprisingly potent the next. The bread, while filling, might be coarse, gritty with millstone dust, and the cheese sharp enough to make your eyes water. It was food of convenience, certainly, often cooked in large batches with an eye on profit over perfection. A gamble, perhaps, each time you bought something. Yet it served its purpose, a fleeting moment of warmth and fullness, a brief respite before the world demanded your attention once more, leaving you to ponder what exactly was in that last mouthful. And yet, even as you pondered the mysteries of that last bite, the immediate, undeniable truth was its swiftness. This was food born of haste, for lives lived in constant motion, a quick transaction in a world that rarely paused. There was no leisurely unfurling of a napkin, no thoughtful contemplation of flavor profiles before the first bite. It was about the now, the pressing need for something warm, something to quell the gnawing emptiness, something to grasp in your hand as you hurried onward through the thronged medieval street. Imagine the scene, a bustling lane, the air, a tapestry of smells, wood smoke, damp earth, animals, and somewhere, the alluring scent of baking. You wouldn't have much time. A pieman might call out, his wares stacked invitingly, faint wisps of steam ghosting from beneath their golden brown crusts. A few coins exchanged, and a hot pasty or a small meat pie would be pressed into your chilled palm. The pastry, likely robust rather than delicate, served as an edible container, its warmth seeping gratefully into your fingers. You'd eat it standing or walking, the savory, peppery scent, a private little pleasure amidst the public clamor and the daily grind. These weren't just fleeting tastes. They were designed to fill. That dense pastry, the hearty if sometimes unidentifiable filling, or even a simple cup of warm, spiced ale from a chattering vendor could be just enough. Enough to see you through to your next, perhaps more substantial, meal, or simply to dull the sharp edges of hunger for a precious hour or two. It was a small investment for a significant, if temporary, return in energy and spirits. That warmth spreading through your chest, a brief, edible moment of peace before the world pulled you back into its relentless rhythm. That fleeting moment of peace, the warmth spreading through your chest as you consumed that quick street fare, was indeed precious. But let's gently pull back the curtain on the sources of these cheap, filling meals. They weren't exactly paragons of pristine preparation. Forget our modern anxieties about artificial colors or chemical preservatives. The medieval concerns were far more elemental, shall we say. The worry wasn't what unpronounceable ingredient was added, but rather what might have been left in, or what corners were cut. Picture the scene, a narrow, bustling thoroughfare. The air, thick with 100 competing aromas, the sharp tang of wood smoke from a nearby hearth, the distant sweetness of baking bread from a more reputable stall, perhaps, but also the unmistakable scent of old cooking fat, or the slightly acrid smell of refuse not yet cleared away from the packed earth beneath your feet. A street cook, his apron a testament to many rushed meals and wiped hands, might call out, offering you a hot pie, its steam curling invitingly in the cool air. What nestled beneath that golden, albeit often greasy pastry crust? Perhaps some good, honest mutton seasoned simply with thyme and salt.